I remember about a month ago from Anime News Network that the Pokémon animated franchise was reaching a new era. Ash Ketchum, or Satoshi as he was known in Japan, would be leaving the series and that things would be moving in a different direction. For someone who used to be a massive fan ever since the games first came to the United States, I've been primarily out of touch with Pokémon since the Hoenn and Sinnoh regions, and haven't played any of the mainline games or watched the show beyond those regions. As time went on, I figured that my own time with the franchise was more or less just done. But I have a couple of friends who remained invested in at least the animated series, so I was always privy to some discussion over show events, like Ash actually winning a league eventually, and unusually spirited discussions about who the best female partner for Ash was. But when the news broke that Ash would no longer be there, I readily admitted that my curiosity was piqued. Looking at the series from the perspective of someone who had been on the outside of Pokémon lore for so long, the series appeared to be in a kind of stasis, with a formula that wouldn't break and therefore cutting off possible opportunities for newer kinds of exploration. So I decided to whet my curiosity and see the first 4 episodes of the new series, Pokémon Horizons, and much to my surprise, I enjoyed it a lot more than I initially suspected that I would. To say that it fills me with the same feelings I had when I was very young and knew the entire Pokerap by heart but not multiplication tables isn't true. I obviously cannot go back to my younger days, but I also cannot ignore the sense that my own interest in the franchise has been rekindled in a way that I was not expecting. So let's take a look at what exactly the first few episodes of Pokémon Horizons have been doing in order to help establish a new status quo. Keep in mind that quite a fair number of my observations will be from someone who has been largely out of touch with the franchise directly, so I apologize in advance if something that I say is an error because it was part of a series installment that I am just not familiar enough with. I'll try to keep these as minimal as possible. Part of the way the series manages to establish itself is by combining the conventions of the franchise's older series and adapting them to newer settings or situations, as well as having some things be completely new. While this is the most obvious point about Pokémon Horizons that people have already talked about to death, and hell, I even alluded to it at the start of this video, it is still something that needs to be addressed. In a departure from the, for lack of a better term, Ash era, we indeed find ourselves following an entirely new protagonist, the young girl Liko. Changing the main character of a long-standing franchise is, in and of itself, a risk. On the one hand, it takes away a point of familiarity that some might have held onto for each of the previous installments. No matter what new place Ash and Pikachu traveled to, viewers could always bank on the spirited nature of those two to take their hand and travel on the road with them. Here, though, because the series is essentially starting all over again, it becomes all the more important to make Liko and her eventual Pokémon partner be endeared to the audience quickly. After all, you wouldn't want to embark on a new journey with characters that you just don't care about in the first several minutes. But the show takes the concept of journeying and doesn't throw it out altogether, instead opting to shift it around. Rather than what we might call the standard opening of a series with traveling to an entirely new region, meeting that region's professor, a bike getting destroyed, and getting our starter Pokémon, Liko instead is traveling to a location familiar to us as audience members, the Kanto region, and enrolling in a Pokémon school. Schools in the Pokémon universe are not exactly new. Roxanne, the gym leader for Rustboro City, was a prime example of fostering younger trainers by filming her battles via the trainer school. Here, though, by setting up a dorm-style living situation, the series thwarts some of the expectations that we have come to, well, expect from a Pokémon series. Who needs to spend all that time camping or preparing food and jelly donuts by a campfire stove when you can just snack in the school's cafeteria and chill out in your dorm room? By appearing at first to remove the traveling aspect, the series adopts a more sedentary setting, where things will be quieter. And part of that initial assumption is that Liko herself is, compared to the more impulsive and impish Ash at the start of his own journey, meeker and shyer. She has trouble connecting with others, and her most prized possession is a pendant from her grandmother. With this personality, it seems that the series will be rather low-key or mellow, matching the sedentary setting with a more solitary character. But the series wisely averts the possibility of boredom by introducing her to her Pokémon partner Sprigatito. In true cat fashion, Sprigatito marches to the beat of its own drum, being fickle, clawing at Liko, and running away. While Sprigatito is not as overtly antagonistic as Pikachu was when it and Ash met back in the franchise's very first episode, by forcing Liko into an uncertain situation and with a less than cooperative partner, it requires her to get over her initial nerves and apprehensions to reach out a hand and create a bond with Sprigatito. It's encapsulated in Liko observing it and trying to understand how to make it friendlier with her, and her with it. We have, therefore, a familiar narrative setup for an unfamiliar cast, allowing the show to dig in its heels early. And thankfully, that bond couldn't come at more perfect timing. A mysterious visitor named Ameteo, who claims to be there on behalf of Liko's grandmother, is asking for her to return the pendant, but Liko and Sprigatito alike feel that something is amiss. This is a rather telling moment for all three characters involved, as it clarifies that, while Liko may be timid and Sprigatito may be a little mischievous, they're not stupid. Liko trying to make efforts to understand Sprigatito, and Sprigatito coming around to Liko's personality, show that they both have the capacity to learn and grow and evaluate, even though some of their development occurs over a time skip. As for Ameteo and his presence, well, it's telling, but we'll get to that in a minute. As for the pressing matter, it leads to a chase sequence for Liko's pendant across the school's rooftops, complete with their first real battle against a Rhydon. Before the first episode is even finished, any sense of normalcy or ordinariness in the story that resembles the Ash era is upended, both by this encounter with Ameteo and the arrival of Frida on a Charizard, along with the pendant emitting a strange glow and shield around Liko and Sprigatito. Gym battles and getting into the Pokemon League seem to be the furthest thing from this show's narrative mind. Regardless of all the changes that the show has undergone at this point, the catalyst moment that crystallizes Pokemon Horizons' form is in displacing Liko and Sprigatito from the comfortable and into the new. In this case, the displacement is rather literal. Frida and Charizard effectively take Liko and Sprigatito away to their ship, which, by the way, tell me that this totally doesn't look like a Super NES Final Fantasy airship, and introduces us to a new cast, the Rising Volticers, complete with Pikachu wearing a captain's hat. Just let this image sink in for a moment. It is so stupidly awesome, and I won't hear any dissenting opinions about it. The Pikachu, referred to as Cap in the show, is another familiar element used in a new way. Pikachu is, for all intents and purposes, the symbol of the Pokemon franchise beyond the image of the classic red and white Pokeball. Pikachu's position in the show is also reframed as being less about cuteness and more about an air of tough grit, sometimes standing on its tail and charging headfirst into danger. Frida is much the same way, a dauntless traveler who, while he may not be quite the most forthcoming individual when it comes to information, seems to have his heart in the right place and will charge into the fray at a moment's notice. By Frida whisking away these two in the course of its first few minutes, it manages to establish the many dynamics quickly. The airship is the show's main hub, with a large-scale landing pad that looks like a Pokemon arena, and even comes with a doggy door of sorts for the smaller Pokemon to get from room to room. The Rising Volticers are a motley crew of fun personalities, and their Pokemon directly interact with the environment by helping keep lookout or keep the engine running. Ameteo's group are very capable trainers and battlers compared to the more well-known comedic fare that Jesse, James, and Meowth of Team Rocket provided for their run, with notable exceptions. Both groups, as evidenced by the battle in the storm during Episode 2, the abduction in Episode 3, and their familiarity with both Liko's pendant and, evidently, her grandmother, present some rather interesting questions. What is the significance of Liko's pendant? Why is it sought after by Ameteo's group, and for what purpose is it supposed to serve? Who exactly are these Rising Volticers? What is Frida supposed to be a professor of exactly? What is the deal with the ancient Pokeball? All of these familiar and new elements combined make it clear that Pokémon Horizons is far more of a mystery show than one would initially assume. It opts for an open-endedness rather than a more concrete goal for its first 4 episodes. With this general sense of mystery and open-endedness interwoven into the structure, I cannot help but think of something that Roy, the other main child character, said. Even though he's only been featured in episode 4 thus far, he talks to Liko about the ancient trainers in that episode, about how they battled legendary Pokemon and sought treasures in places that no one had explored or considered before. It's as though the entire purpose of this series was encapsulated in that dialogue. The Pokemon universe itself is an expanse of places, people, and monsters that can cater to most people's aesthetic sensibilities in terms of monster designs and the various things that could be done there, like league battles, Pokemon contests, or any other incidentals that the narrative could come up with. But the animated series seemed to travel on one particular route, probably because they never got the cut HM, no matter how many new maps were charted. Get the gym badges, get to the Pokemon League, try to win, etc. That's always how it seemed anyway. The series seems to be re-examining the heart of what made Pokemon such a cultural milestone in the first place. Despite all the departures from the usual formula that Pokemon Horizons has been making narratively, much like the spirit of the original series, that of warmly embarking on a large new adventure, it seems like it is endeavoring to rediscover its original heart from so many years ago. By tracing back the more foundational grandeur and awe of Ash leaving Pallet Town with his Pikachu, it allows its new protagonists Liko, Sprigatito, Roy, and Fuecoco to leave the old behind and tackle new challenges. It's ultimately the same familiar spirit of old, but rejuvenated for a new generation. It's important also to keep in mind that Pokemon is a franchise primarily targeted towards children, so it's not going to have the inner gumption to break its child-friendly action-adventure fantasy by delving into something way more adult than what's to be expected. I cannot speak for everyone, but for myself, Pokemon Horizons has an energy and mysticism that reads as refreshing and rekindles an old candle that I thought went out a long time ago. I imagine that for children, it will continue to be the wonderful cartoon that it has always been. As long as it keeps its adventurous spirit, I can picture myself sticking with this every week. Its first 4 episodes left a good impression. There's mystery and there's intrigue, and I look forward to more. Thank you for watching. Feel free to like, comment, subscribe, join Discord, follow socials, or donate to my Patreon, and click the bell for notifications. In the meantime, this has been ZNote of ZNoteTaku. Happy viewing, everyone!